Hi, I'm Alex from Barefaced, and that was me making some noise. And there is a context to this, because the reason Barefaced came about is that I play bass in a certain way, in certain sorts of bands, and I ran into limitations and got frustrated quite rapidly with bass rigs. Now, started back in the 90s when I started playing, and I ended up importing some unusual cabs from America and getting a really powerful power amp for them. And then I had this huge pedal board with, it expanded to about a dozen pedals. And I gradually sort of evolved a fairly eccentric way of playing bass, because I was in bands where I was contributing writing. Then eventually I ended up leading the band and unfortunately ended up singing, which I'm not very good at, whilst also playing bass and writing originals, and basically spending a lot of time in crap rehearsal rooms, crap venues, small audiences, rubbish PA systems, sharing the night with a load of other bands, so you've got short sets, very limited time to sound check, shared gear. And the problem with that was that if I'd just been playing bass in a more conventional way, it would have been rubbish compared to having great gear and great sound checks at times set up. But it was even more of a problem when the sound of the band very much revolved around what I was doing as a bassist, because I was playing chords and I was playing through lots of effects. I was using distortion. I was filling up a lot of space, often playing quite like a guitarist. But then the flip side of it is that I'm not really, when I'm playing bass, a sort of guitar-y sort of bass player. I'm not playing like Lemmy with a pick or something like that. And I'm not often playing conventional rock parts. I'll be playing stuff that's, although it's often in rock music and heavier context, it's things like reggae influence lines or funk influence lines. Big fan of Larry Graham, Family Man Barrett. So I found myself playing in these crap venues and doing things that needed good sound. I couldn't get away with poor sound. So I was going to give some examples of this. So there's this particular song from my old band, which I haven't played in like 10 years odd. But it started with a part like this, which is quite an unusual sort of thing to be playing. It went... So what you'll have noticed with that is I'm playing these double stops up here and also playing some bass notes in there with them. I've put some phaser on it because it sounds nice. And that part, you need that clarity. And your typical bass rig, even if you've got the clarity where you're standing, it's not there where the rest of the band is. Because the dispersion's just so poor on a typical old style 410, not the way we make our 410s now, and then the mid-range clarity and detail needs to be there. And also there's a lot of bass cabs, from the, certainly ones that aren't ours, where if there is clarity, the clarity is only there in the treble. And we don't want just clarity in the treble, we want clarity through the mid-range. Then it hopped into that part which is kind of, I don't know, a two-tone sort of. And with that, timing's absolutely critical. It's a punchy part, there's a lot of staccato notes, and so it's very groove focused. So I need a bass rig that starts and stops just like that, which some ported cabs aren't that great at. Well-designed ones can be, but yeah, you've got to have a cab where the amp can make the speaker move and the speaker stop, and there isn't sort of excessive resonance within the enclosure that's messing things up, or panel resonance on the enclosure. And then that particular song after the chorus, and I was trying to think what the arrangement was, but it would then run into a bit like this. So you've gone from the... I'm going to be making mistakes because I can't be bothered to do a second take. Again, mistakes, but so that, it gets heavy, it gets loud, there's a lot of distortion. Distortion is demanding on mid-range power handling, and there's some stuff can sound really horrible when you run distortion through. There's a real juggling act there. And then after that it would drop into this part where I go down, crank the bass knob on the bass and be like... So that's basically a big one-drop reggae bass line, but with some fairly minor tonality. And I expect that to completely shake the room. It's got to thunder. The problem with your typical thunderous bass rig is it's bloody huge. So your typical sort of reggae rigs, they are huge. Your typical loud rock cab, which can handle lots of distortion, like say an Ampeg 810, it won't thunder in that way. Obviously this is being recorded just through the little mic. It's a miniature shotgun mic on top of the camera, because this isn't really about the sound you're hearing, this is about me explaining the context of things. That in this room is just shaking everything, and I haven't even got things turned up. So to gig that would be really loud. So your typical bass cabs cannot handle that. A typical 410 could not put out the sort of output I needed. I needed something that really thundered. The rig I was using at the time was 1800 watts into two very high excursion 210s, and I used to really reach the limit of that rig. And I wanted this to be practical to take to rehearsals. I'm not particularly bothered about how much stuff weighs, but then when it looked like the speakers that could do what I wanted in terms of the output and the clarity and the dynamics, it looked like they had neo magnets, so they were inherently light speakers. Then I was like, well, why make a heavy box? And so that's kind of how the Barefaced became a commercially viable thing by accident, because once you've made something that sounds really good and is really light, then people are like, well, I want that, I want to gig with it. So it's like, okay, well, I'll make some and see if they sell. And it sort of ran on from there. The other key thing was that on the gigs I was doing, we might be out and playing with, like, I don't know, half a dozen other bands. Sound checks are very short and gear's getting shared, and because I generally had the best bass rig of any of the bands on the lineup, I'd want mine to be taken, but I'd also want a rig that, despite it being literally thousands of watts, wasn't going to get blown up by players who were used to playing through a 15-inch 100-watt combo and being able to crank it, and it always sounded awful, but it didn't explode. So I'd had issues with previous bass cabs really struggling with what I was asking from them, so the Barefaced cabs had to be bomb-proof in that sense. And the other key thing, and this is a corollary of the sort of gigs I was doing, as well as the limited time to sound check, the PA systems were generally not very good. So either the PA systems could only handle vocals, or if they could handle the rest of the band, you really didn't want to be putting a lot of bass through it. My drummer at the time was a great drummer, and he had one big kit which had a 26-inch kick drum. That was great because that could carry the room. But when using the smaller kit, you need to put some kick through the PA. So then you don't, if you're already using the kick drum to eat up a load of the PA's headroom, you don't want to start sticking a load of thunderous bass guitar through it, because you eat up the PA's ability to produce output, and you start to really lose the clarity in the vocals. And we were putting some guitar through it and some saxophone. So I wanted a bass rig that could carry the house, and also so you needed the output to do the whole room, but you also needed the dispersion that all my bandmates, who were very much reliant on my playing because it was the foundation and the glue and how how the songs were written and where it had all come from, they all needed to be able to hear me, but I didn't want to be putting a load of that back through the monitors, because the monitors were struggling to just take my vocals, and the sax. So that was really the logic behind it. Now, I'm wandering over to see how long this has been rolling for. It's probably going to need a bit of editing. But here we are. I'll give a quick run through